Chapter 3, Early Life in the R.A.F. On the 28th of February, 1941. A wet, cold, rather dismal day, I travelled by train from London to Warrington in Lancashire to report to Royal Air Force Padgate, a personal reception centre. My official day of entering the service was the 1st of March. On arrival at Warrington we were met by service and co's who marshalled us to awaiting trucks to transport us a few miles to R.A.F. Padgate. The group of wartime huts that comprised the camp did not really make an inspiring sight on a miserable winter's day in Lancashire. I almost felt like turning around and going back again. We were to spend a week at the centre where we were medically examined, inoculated, kitted out with uniform etc. and generally prepared for our initial recruit training. Firstly, we were issued with bedding and allocated a bed space in a hut with 30 to 40 other recruits. We came from all walks of life and were somewhat diffident of one another to start with. However, we soon found the people we were happy with and friendships were very quickly formed, although in this case, since it was such a short stay, they were unlikely to be lasting. We were not allowed out of camp and just spent each day going through the various routines of induction and finding our way around the camp facilities. The Airmen's mess provided a cuisine which I would not particularly like to repeat. Wartime service food was not especially appetizing at the best of times, and Padgate was no exception. We supplemented our diet by spending our limited amount of money in the NAFI service canteen. Here we were able to obtain basic additions to our diet, pies, chips, that sort of thing. There was also a ration allowance for each person of cigarettes, sweets, chocolate. Also available too were books, magazines and newspapers, and stationery, for the very necessary purpose of writing home. The week soon passed and we were told that we were now to be moved to a recruitment training centre at R.A.F. Bridgnorth in Shropshire. A train journey of approximately an hour or so from Warrington. We were certainly very pleased to be moving on from R.A.F. Padgate and hoped that our new training, which was to last 4 weeks, would be more enjoyable than the previous week we had just endured. We revelled in the exalted rank of Aircraftsman Second Class, AC2, commonly referred to as sprogs, the lowest form of animal life in the service. Where the term comes from I do not know, but rookie was also commonly used. Wartime troop train journeys in UK were something else. The journey from Warrington to Bridgnorth was meant to be about an hour or so, but troop trains were often shunted into sidings and generally delayed. So the journey of about 50 miles ended up taking 5 hours. The other special feature of wartime trains, particularly the troop variety, was that they did not enjoy the benefit of heating. So after the hours crowded up in the train we duly arrived at Bridgnorth, and were moved by truck to the camp. The weather was cold and as the camp was on a hill several hundred feet above sea level it was covered with a coating of snow and ice. Apart from the efforts of its occupants to clear the roads, paths and parade areas, we were soon to be recipients of shovels to enjoy the snow clearing parties. These had one relief and they usually ended up in snowball fights between rival groups. The same routine as our arrival at Padgate ensured, and we were allocated huts, bed spaces and bedding and allowed to unpack our kit into rather small lockers. Each hut had a corporal drill instructor to maintain discipline and orderliness who had a separate room cum office at the entrance of the hut. When you first enter the service these corporals assume a very great importance in your daily life. They can make it enjoyable or extremely unpleasant, dependent on your response to discipline and general attitude to service life. Some could make it a dog's life for the recruits regardless of your attitude, but very dependent on theirs. Corporal Percy introduced himself in a rather unique, but not uncharacteristic manner for these disciplinarians. He advised us that off duty he was Corporal Percy the nice chap, but on parade he said I am known as Percy the bastard. Fair warning and not incorrect as we found out. However, he had a good sense of humor underneath it all and we got to like him. He was an excellent drill instructor and had been a school teacher in civil life. One night he showed the humor clearly. We were all singing the communist red flag anthem after lights out. When Corporal Percy put the lights on and inquired who was singing the red flag, no one replied and he then asked who wasn't. A couple of chaps said they weren't. He gave them a sharp reminder, why not, next time you all sing it, or else this made us all the more respectful of him and realize that he was human. The next 4 weeks passed quickly with hours and hours of square bashing, drill, kit inspections and various other chores. Kit inspections had to be done with meticulous care, with every single item of kit laid out in a fixed pattern, spotlessly clean and on one's made up bed, also to a standard layout. There is some sense in this, because it enables the inspecting officer to move quickly, and with a practiced eye can spot any items missing or not up to scratch. During the inspection, the officer was accompanied by a senior NCO and the corporal in charge of the hut. Lockers also had to be opened to show that one's personal belongings were also clean and tidily arranged. Some of the less enjoyable moments in this camp were the medical inspections and a weekly FFI, free from infection, inspection, a ritual well known in the services. You parade in your hut by your bed, or a line in sick quarters, and the medical officer inspects your genitals to see if you have any signs of venereal disease. It is an offense in the service to conceal such ailments. It also makes good sense, although humiliating at first. It reduces the likelihood of any spread of disease, very dangerous in such close quarters living. By now we had got used to using our service number and knew it off by heart, normally, such as in a pay parade. Your name was called out and you responded sir and called out the last 3 digits of your number. So I was Bates 588, my full number being 1,330,588. You then, having identified yourself, marched forward, saluted the paying officer, collected your pay and signed for it. At this stage our pay was as AC, 2s. Was 2 shillings and 6pence per day, not a vast sum, but enough to scrape along in those days, bearing in mind this was really spending money only, as we were clothed, fed and watered for free. In those days I had not succumbed to the demon alcohol and did not smoke, all that came later. Without these evils, and only being free to leave camp on certain days, money stretched out quite well. Female diversion was not available on camp as the WAFs showed no inclination to meet us sprogs. We were only going to be around for a few weeks, so I didn't blame them. The only real contact with them was when they served our meals, so-called, in the cookhouse or as nurses and medical staff. Mostly our days off and evenings out comprised a walk down to Bridgnorth to the cinema and then for some drinks in the R.A.F at the Salvation Army or church canteens. I was a regular churchgoer and went to services when I could. On full days off we would travel further afield by hitchhiking to cities like Shrewsbury and Wolverhampton. We were all of different ages and walks of life, and one older chap I met was from Manchester. He was a professional concert pianist whose services were always in demand in canteens as he played a wide variety of music quite superbly. Another was a Durham miner and a rough diamond. I was very friendly with another Londoner, Bill Boyd, who was also going to be a pilot. He was a great practical joker. His favorite trick was to tie a piece of string to your china tea mug, secrete the string, and as he passed your empty mug, drop it, and as you frantically clutched at it to stop it falling, the string will stop it hitting the floor. He was always full of fun and never let the various setbacks of service life get him down. We went our separate ways, but I did meet up with him later after he got his wings. One quite shattering incident happened during my stay, and that was a visit to the camp dentist. He filled 4 of my teeth in 20 minutes without any anesthetic, and he screamed at me the whole time to keep your bloody mouth open. He was, I am sure, some sort of a sadist, and the pain, especially the drilling, was excruciating. It was the first really close contact I had with an officer, and I shall never forget the experience. Eventually our training came to a close with a phase of weapons training at the end, including the Lee Enfield 303 rifle and the Sten machine gun, which we learned to fire live on a rifle range. We completed our training at Bridgnorth and were given a 3-day leave pass, which enabled me to go home to London, and for the first time in uniform. I felt fit and well, having completed a hard spell of training in tough weather conditions. I was also very proud of my uniform and took great pride in looking smart. At 5 foot 11 inches tall, slim and fit, I think I looked a reasonably presentable airman. Thus happy with life, I was pleased further with the welcome I got from my friends and family, and of course my dog Trixie. In particular, my girlfriend Joan seemed very impressed and glad to have me in R.A.F uniform. She had a brother who was a flight sergeant air gunner who had already done a tour of bomber operations on Wellington aircraft. When I met him I was quite in awe of him, but he gave me lots of confidence. Young male civilians did not cut the same ice with the ladies as we did in uniform, and that made those of us in the service even more pleased with ourselves. We aircrew under training wore a distinguished white flash in our forage caps, a further symbol of pride. On leaving Bridge North we had received our next posting, and mine was to go to R.A.F Top Cliff near Thirsk in Yorkshire. A No. 4 group bomber base with 2 Armstrong Whitworth Whitley bomber squadrons, numbers 77 and 142. Our work until we went to begin the aircrew training was on ground defense duties. Which sounded fine, but proved rather different in practice. I travelled from London to Topcliffe by train on the 4th of April, 1942, where I was to stay until the 23rd of May. It was exciting to be on an operational station with its atmosphere of frontline activity. And to see the crews and aircraft whom I knew were flying over Germany night after night was a thrill. However, one Flight Sergeant Hart and Sergeant Sweeney were to bring me down to earth with a jolt. They turned out to be a right pair of bastards. At first, I did not realize why they were so anti-airman aircrew, but I soon found out. These old sweats who were pre-war permanent Air Force had taken years and years to become NCOs. Just before I reached Topcliffe the policy to have all aircrew of sergeant rank or above had been introduced. This meant that air gunners and wireless operators, who might previously have been corporals or below, were suddenly elevated to a minimum rank of sergeant, and thereby entitled to use the sergeant's mess. Most of these gunners had only been in the service a few months, and to have the inner sanctum of the sergeant's mess invaded by these sprogs was too much for the old sweats. What better chance than to take it out on a bunch of the aircrew trainees? The first thing Sergeant Sweeney did was to order us to take down our white flashes. "You are not bloody aircrew yet," he said. For the next 2 weeks they chased us from pillar to post. Our task was to erect barbed wire on the perimeter defenses of the airfield. The only light relief from this chore was by one of our number, an Irishman named, of course, Paddy, who was quite mad and insisted on hurling himself at each section of the barbed wire we completed. To test its effectiveness, he would call out "stand back" and then run about 20 yards at the wire to try and penetrate it. Proved bloody and painful for him, but he seemed to enjoy it. We certainly did. Often this meant a 2-mile trip to the far side of the airfield. Although transport ran regularly around the airfield, we were not allowed to board it, even to go to lunch. Sergeant Sweeney would board the truck though, but would betide us if he found us getting a lift. He would get on a truck after setting us off and wait at the other end to see how we traveled. I was even worse off than others because both Sweeney and Hart came from Manchester and seemed to hate Londoners. Fortunately, relief came suddenly, for we were taken off the barbed wiring and moved to the Ground Defense Operations Center in the main bomber operations block. We came under the command of an army major, who was a real gentleman. Our task was to man the air raid plotting room, where we received reports of all German aircraft crossing the east coast and their destinations, and plotted them as they moved across England to bomb the various targets. At this time the main raids were on Liverpool, Manchester and other northern cities, Germans having switched the main blitz away from London. It was interesting work as we were close to the bomber ops room and could follow the comings and goings of the Whitley squadrons as they bombed Germany. One bonus came from this period, and it came surprisingly. Part of our tasks was to mount guard at night, armed with rifles and challenging all that came to the main gate. During the course of one period on guard I got talking to a sergeant pilot on 77 Squadron. He told me a lot about my future training and invited me to come the 77 Squadron offices, where he would fix me up with a flight on one of the squadron training flights. This really improved my morale and I eagerly took up the offer, which eventuated in a 3-hour flight in a Whitley whilst the crew carried out navigation, bombing and gunnery training over the Irish Sea. It was a memorable point in my life as I flew for the first time, a boost for the love I had already developed for aviation. As we roared down the takeoff run and climbed out over the hills and dales of Yorkshire, I felt a wondrous exhilaration. This was for me. We climbed out above the clouds and across England, out over the Irish Sea, and as the clouds broke I saw the shining water below, a panorama of beauty not to be forgotten. In all I was to have 4 flights in Whitley's totaling 10 hours, an important step to convince me that I could enjoy flying and suffer no ill effects. I felt safe, sure and contented in this new environment, a portent for the future. The captain, a flight lieutenant, was very kind to me and at one spell let me come and sit in the co-pilot's seat, telling me what all the controls and instruments did. On a further flight I went on a night flying test flight and the crew told me they were off to Berlin that night. In those days the targets for the night was common knowledge in the base. This practice soon came to an end, due to the Germans gaining the same knowledge through their agents. German air defenses having been alerted to the target to be attacked were suitably prepared, enabling them to inflict heavy losses on the R.A.F. crews. Future operations we kept well secret as to target destinations, the crew only being told the target for the attack at their final briefing. Just an hour or so before they went direct to the aircraft for takeoff. The last flight I did was only an hour long but eventful, caused by the failure of the airspeed indicator system. I was quite oblivious to what went on until after we had landed rather heavily and fast. The pilots then explained to me what had happened and that it had been caused by a blockage in the pilot system, the means of which airspeed is registered on the speed indicator. After those flights I had in Whitley's I became impatient to get on with my pilot training and became frustrated at the waiting. So frustrated did I become that I was almost persuaded to join the ground defense gunners and go with them as they told me they were off to the Middle East. Fortunately, just as I was weighing up this option, two of my comrades got their posting to begin pilot training, so I gave up any idea of change. This gave me hope and shortly afterwards I received my posting to R.A.F. Babacom, the air crew receiving centre near Torquay and Devon. Although life had been a bit hard at Topcliffe, I did, in retrospect, get quite a lot from it. I had served on an operational bomber station, had done rough jobs with all sorts of other airmen, had seen the good and the bad side of the service by being kicked around and had generally matured as a result. During free time I had been able to see a bit of rural Yorkshire, the town of Thirsk, and had a few days visiting the beautiful city of York, all of which I enjoyed, for I love travel. Now at last I was to embark on the training I had been selected for, as a pilot. I was given a few days leave which enabled me to stay at home en route to R.A.F. Babacom and the more pleasant climate of Devon. It was now May and I felt the joys of spring as I set out on the great adventure, the start of my aviation career.